And behold, a certain lawyer stood up and tested him, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? He said to him, What is written in the law? What is your reading of it?
Hey everyone, welcome back to Searching the Sacred. Lisa, Steph, and Jason here with you as always. And we are launching into a new season. And this season is going to be unlike anything that we've done before. Instead of doing a deep dive into particular passages of scripture and kind of doing our midrash scripture circle dance within the text and diving into it all, we are actually going to try to answer some big questions, or better put, we're going to continue the conversation that many people are having about how to navigate sacred text, especially the Bible, and we're going to add our voice to that. Ideally, we're helping people maybe reclaim the Bible as a sacred text or come back to it with fresh eyes, or maybe they're going to come at it with all of the disgruntled frustrations that they've been wrestling with for years, and this will be a continuation of that wrestle and that disgruntledness. Whatever it is, we're inviting you into it as we try to help navigate our way through how do we read this thing. And as Jesus instructs us, what is written and what is your reading of it? Those are the two overarching questions that we want to settle into and unpack as we go through this season. So that's our intro. That's the new season. Let's go.
Welcome to it. I'm glad you corrected and didn't make us have to answer all these questions.
Yeah, no, we're just going to talk about them. But I think, this is a verse that's been on our website for a long time, because noticing that Jesus separates these two questions is a key part of how we read the text, but also how people read the text without always realizing it, that there's a difference between what is there and how we read it. And that understanding those two questions as separate questions affects a lot about what we do with the Bible and its implications on our lives. And to say there's a difference between what is in it and how we read it. And do we know that difference? There isn't there's some of those really crazy acronyms of the Bible, or people say the Bible says it, I believe it, it's true. That's treating it as only one question. Well, it says it, it's there, as compared to, no, but you're reading it a certain way. Are you aware of how you're reading it? How do you want to be reading it? What's a good way to read it?
Well, and I think being that the Bible has been around for so long now, I mean, when this was said by Jesus, right? Not everyone was literate. Not everyone had all the scrolls of the Hebrew scriptures at their disposal. Not everyone was studying it constantly. Now, the people he was talking to, the scribes, Pharisees, teachers of the law, all that, they may have been, but the common person was not. But now, with the printing press and so on and so forth, we got the Bible in our pocket all the time. Everybody has access to this. And there's so much about the Bible that is out there. And so the idea of, well, the Bible says ... There's a part of me that loves that first question of what's actually written, because I don't know if all the cliches about the Bible are true. I've had many conversations with people that I dearly love that have been a part of the church for generations, and they say things and I'm like, is that really in there? Is that really what's written? And it's like, well, yeah. And it's like, well, find it for me, and then it's not, so I think that first question's incredibly important. That gets us to the second question of, okay, now how do you read it with all of your biases and background and cultural influence and everything that makes you you and what you've been taught and studied and all that stuff. But that first question can sometimes really throw people off too. What's actually in there? Let's be real about it.
Well, I also feel like it's maybe I'll ride the line between both, because I've been fascinated with interpretations and language and how that all plays into things. And we know it, but we kind of ignore it, that this was actually an oral history and an oral story for so long. So the idea that it's the actual everything is interesting, and that we actually, in our English translations, and we all know that we have multiple translations. We already know we've got versions. You got King James, you've got New Living, NIV, ESV. We already know in English, we're struggling to get to the language of it. So I just think it's fascinating. So to think about what is written, well, depends on what your position you're holding, and how and what you know about those things. So,
well, and so I think we're gonna think about this one section at a time. Like we're really going to spend the whole season on these questions and the questions between these questions. And so the first piece of it that we're looking at today is just this conversation about why the Bible, why even read it at all, which does relate. I think it is worth noting that when in the translation that Lisa read, it says what's in the law, how do you read it? So just to say that, like, in that context, what people would hear with law isn't like a list of rules, or isn't just Leviticus. It's the word nomos, and it would be the idea of the Pentateuch. It would be the idea of sacred text, that he would be, when he says the law, it's meaning sacred text. So we're taking that question to mean, how do you read the sacred text? What's in the sacred text? How do you read the sacred text? So we're really thinking first about why read the Bible as a sacred text, and what does it mean for it to be a sacred text? How do you hold it being that? How do we hold it being that? Is really our question today. Why read it at all as a sacred text, and what does it mean for us to think of it as sacred? And what have different traditions said about what sacred has to mean or doesn't mean? And so that's really where we're going today. So small little questions like, is the Bible inerrant? Is it infallible? Is it, what does it mean for it to be sacred? And why do I think it maybe is helpful to start with the personal aspect of that. Like, why do the three of us still care about this book or read this book at all?
Well, I don't want to go to hell, so that's my primary reason. For those not watching on YouTube, we all chuckled and laughed because that's the good evangelical in all of us coming out, that we've all tried to gingerly walk away from, or slam the door and run away from, one of the two.
I read this book,
or I got kicked out of the door. I mean,
or got kicked out.
I mean, just to be clear.
Good point.
There's a book I read recently called The Power of Ritual by Casper, and I don't know how to say his last name because I think he's Dutch, and it's a name it's a language I'm not familiar with. But
I probably could do it.
What?
I said I probably could do it.
Maybe you could look up his name. I'm not going to try. His first name's Casper. I can say that. But one of the chapters was talking about just the power of having a sacred text at all, and the way that it provides a rooting to return to something again and again. And that in and itself sort of creates a sacredness to the text you're returning to again and again, if you ask good questions of it and the way that it can inform your life. And I really resonated with some of the ways he was talking about that in that book, of like, when I think about the Bible, I read it a lot differently than I used to. That second question is really different answer for me than it was 10, 15, 20, 25 years ago. But for me, even as that has changed, I still want to read it. I still want to see what's in it. There's something powerful to me about going back to it and learning new things about myself and about the divine and about the world through returning to the same text.
A lot of it comes from, I think, actually like growing up in a conservative, evangelical, like Reformed, Christian Reformed church. So the Bible was so like deeply a part of things. I didn't really have language for it until I went to seminary, which was interesting. Like, I didn't realize like how, like in a Lutheran seminary, how weird that would be. I just assumed everybody felt the same way about the Bible and its authority and whatnot. And so I remember sitting in a class, and they actually were talking about like Methodist, and like they brought out the Wesleyan quadrilateral and talked about how it can be like, it could be Bible, but it could be your experiences, it could be the tradition, it can be like reason, like all these different things. And I was like, wait, what? And like, it was one of these very interesting moments for me, that suddenly I was on the side of folks that I theologically disagreed with, who would have said as a woman I shouldn't be in the room. But like, that's actually where I like ended up, is in their space, because I was like, no, I do think the Bible is really important. I actually use it as the basis for my faith. And even more so, I feel like somehow, like, and in 40 Orchards, it allowed me to like do it differently, which kept me in my faith. Because I don't think I could do the things that I was doing before. So it's this interesting tension for me of like, it actually is really elevated. I just learned that at a young age, and that hasn't shaken off. That still feels relevant. And, but I know that it's nuanced from what it was.
Yeah, I really resonate with a lot of what you both have said. And I think for me, I would repeat a lot of what you said. So instead of doing that, like about all the childhood stuff and like it always being a part of the thing that I do and working in ministry right after college to all the way up until my current profession as a pastor and preaching on the thing every week. I think for me, I think of it like, okay, I am not just a flesh bag moving through time and history on a ball of gas that's whatever, like I'm not like, I don't think we're just material. Like I think there is something spiritual, metaphysical about creation, about humanity, and I don't have answers. Like I'm not one that's like, and God did this and God did that and like this is how it is and we're no for sure. And like I'm not like a big person on certainty. Like I like to think that I have some good ideas based on what I understand, but also I think it is a big giant mystery, like, how we got here, how humans have developed, how our minds work, what is the divine and how does the divine interact with the human, and what does it mean that Jesus says things like, as I am in you, may they be in us. It's like, what is that? Like, okay, okay, what does it mean that we believe in a scripture where God becomes a flesh bag and is willing to die on a cross? Like that's a really weird thing for a God to do. So yeah, I think that's part of the power of it, is it feels like this is helping explain what it means to be human, as well as helping me understand the divine. But I actually like the first part better than the second part. I think so often we're like, we have to understand who God is. And it's like, okay, really? Like, are we? Or maybe we're supposed to learn about God so we can really learn about being human. Maybe that's the point. But anyway, so that's why I keep coming back to it. Like, how can I be a better human? How can I be a better flesh bag that's also a spiritual being?
I don't know how I feel about this flesh bag situation.
Yeah, you're really on the flesh bag.
I know. I think
I think I'm uncomfortable.
I don't know if it's a Rob Bell or Richard Rohr thing, but like I heard it once and I was like,
that's why I'm uncomfortable.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. I try to sprinkle that stuff in to piss you guys off as much as I can. So just subtly.
I think as seminary has come up, I think that, part of what I think we've all encountered in seminary that a lot of people don't have the opportunity to experience is realizing that views that we had about something weren't the only possibility of how to have that view. And like I remember being assigned a book about the atonement where it was multiple views on the atonement. I was like, there's multiple views on the atonement, that happens in multiple classes. But one of those things that comes up is how to hold the Bible, and this recognition that Lisa already gave about the Wesleyan quadrilateral. I can't say the word
quadrilateral. Yep, you're good.
Quad.
Wesleyan quad. And so I think it's probably helpful to just talk a little bit about some of those possibilities, because for some people, I think they've encountered a view of inerrancy and think that, because I don't believe that anymore, I can't read the Bible anymore. So I think just thinking about some of the things we know about ways that people hold the Bible as sacred, so maybe some of the terms that would be used. I have something pulled up about inerrancy that I'm going to read, because that one I wanted to get correct. But it's also not the only view. But I'm going to start there and maybe have us respond to it a little bit. So biblical inerrancy is the belief that the Bible in its original manuscripts is completely free from error in all that it affirms. This includes not only theological and moral teachings, but also historical and scientific claims. The idea of biblical inerrancy, meaning the Bible is without error, gained prominence in the 19th and 20th centuries, particularly in the United States, as a response to modern biblical scholarship and criticism. The most well-known articulation of this doctrine is the Chicago Statement on Biblical Inerrancy, which was drafted in 1978. Baptist, Pentecostal, evangelical, and fundamentalist churches tend to hold a doctrine of inerrancy.
Mm-hmm.
And you didn't list a whole lot of denominations.
Yes, I mean, I just felt like it's worth just saying that, and then saying denominations that tend to, even as important. They're not all Baptist denominations would hold that. Many would.
I this actually came up last week. I was having a conversation at my other job. I interact with other pastors. We were sitting down talking about something, and he's like, "Wait, you don't think the Bible's inerrant?" And it still makes my body. I still have a reaction to like answer it honestly and go, "Actually, no."
Mm-hmm.
Like that takes a hot minute for me to even say it because I am still waiting for like a lightning strike. Because it also was super core to like my upbringing. And
Mm-hmm.
it feels like a slight on who God is by saying no. And like I know now that there's other options, but like for a very long time, I didn't realize you could say that and still be like a Christian.
Can we parse this out just for a second? I know this is going to get nerdy and get into the weeds, but I kind of think that's the whole point of this season, is that in some of these questions, we are going to get into the weeds. We're not just going to like, hey, inerrancy, here's a, quote, moving on. Like I think actually that's the whole point. There are aspects of what you read that I still hold to. And then there are aspects of what you read that I'm like, absolutely not. Like, so does inerrancy have to, I mean, like, that's one author's definition of inerrancy based on scholarly research and other documents like the Chicago thing or whatever. Is it possible to hold that the words written in the Bible were not done in error, but that they maybe weren't trying to spout scientific truth like a biology textbook written in 2025? Like, because like there's a bunch of things that you said after you said the Bible's without error, which means ... Well, okay, pause. I actually believe that the Bible was without error. Like I don't think that Moses wrote 10 commandments when he was supposed to write 9 or 11. Like I think 10 was the actual, like I believe that. Like I believe that Noah's Ark was written accurately according to how the author was trying to write it, or God was inspiring the author. I don't have a problem with Paul writing his letters and accurately reflecting what he was hearing from the Spirit, or what he was led to tell these churches. I actually don't think there was errors there. I just don't think that the theological and scientific ways of using the Bible are appropriate and or accurate, because I don't think that's what the Bible was trying to do.
Well, and I think what you're getting at with that question, Jason, is what takes you inside and outside of a doctrinal statement.
Yeah,
So,
good. That's perfect. I like the way you put that. You
right?
succinctly put what we've been trying to say.
Well, because that's really what people are wrestling with these sorts of issues is, I believe part of it. Well, for many doctrinal statements in many denominations, you have to believe all of it to be in.
100%.
And if you only believe part of it, you're out. And in some cases, places are holding their doctrinal statements differently, where it does feel okay to feel part of it. But with this one, it tends to be, we're going to use the word tend again. This tends to be one where if you don't believe 100% of what I just said, you would be on the out of it. And that's part of what people then wrestle with when they come into our circles is, if I don't believe this anymore, am I still a Christian? Because it feels like, because I'm on the out of that doctrinal statement, am I on the out of everything?
Mm-hmm.
As compared to, for most of us, we would partially believe a lot of doctrinal statements.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, in a lot of circumstances, that's not enough.
Yeah.
Lisa, how did you feel about the word inerrant as I was reading that definition?
It's just a complicated word, because I know what it means to the folks that I grew up with, and that's where I don't. I have a hard time. Here's where this is where it kind of gets like complicated for me, because I feel like for folks that hold the Bible as inerrant, we then get into really interesting conversations then about like choices of what you do. Like it is the question. I mean, it makes sense to me why Jesus asked the question. Because then how you read it really, really matters. If it's inerrant and there is no room, then it really, really matters what's in there and how it's interpreted. Like interpretations and textual choices matter. I mean, like when we talk about the like human sexuality, the text has changed. Is that inerrant? Like I have.
Can you give a more precise, like you just said something really monumental, but without actually going into it? Can you just go into it for like 4 seconds?
Well, the idea of like the Bible talking about homosexuality is not actually written into the text. We've interpreted it, twisted, and it's been added. It was not always there.
There's translation issues as part of what I would say when we're looking at a document written in Hebrew and Greek that is then being translated into English, and the choice of word in those translations make a huge difference in this conversation about, is there error in the translation?
Yeah. So specifically, you're talking about 2 verses, one in like I think it's 2 Corinthians and one in 2 Timothy, that use the term homosexuality in our modern translations, and that word was not used as part of a translation until the 50s or 60s, that it was added in, and it was added in as a way of gatekeeping a people group that were having same-sex relationships on a level that in previous human history we hadn't really seen before, which is why that word was not used. Because 2 people falling in love and having a mutual loving relationship of the same gender was not something that we saw, and so that word didn't exist, and then it did, and then we used it to try to understand what Paul wrote in the first century, when Paul would have no understanding of that being a possibility of human relationship.
Right. Well, it's like some of the, I don't know if there's still big arguments. It's not in my world anymore, but I know it still is a thing of like the 7 days of creation. In inerrancy, it is a literal 7 days of creation. Like there are certain things that I'm like, okay, is that what we're still holding? Is that like there's questions about, but it also like in the conversation that we were having a conversation about whether you conceal and carry. And
you went from 7 days of creation to conceal and carry.
Well, wow. That's why this is why the conversation came up. The conversation came up because we were having a dialogue. We work in an area that has seen increased violence, and the question often gets asked, especially as women, are you going to conceal and carry? Or I'd feel better if you were concealing and carrying. And I have just said, like, I am not comfortable killing somebody. It is one of the reasons that I didn't pursue the career pathway that I thought I was going to do. I can't imagine doing it. And I feel good about like who I am in my life and where I am. There's probably very few things that would make me harm another human. And I get that that's, everybody has a different like focus on those things. But the conversation then becomes this one of like, well, if somebody comes in my house, I'm killing them. Oh, is that what Jesus would do? So for me, then it's the question of like, well, what did Jesus say about that kind of thing? Well, Jesus doesn't talk about arming, but Jesus does talk about other things. And so like, it's an interesting diet. Like when you get into the actual, like, it's not just what you read, but it's how you read it. Like how you interpret it and then how you actually make lived actions. It goes hand in hand. You can't, if you're going to do inerrancy, then you really have to work with like, how do you read it?
I kind of want to add a question to Jesus's 2 questions of what's in it? How do you translate it? How do you read that translation? Because when we're translating, part of what that is happening is it's translating language, but it's also translating culture and time. So the Bible doesn't talk about guns because there weren't guns. So we have to do this work of seeing what's there in English and wondering what was there in the original language, but then also translating what's there from a different culture and time into what makes sense in our culture and time. So there's actually several steps to holding anything in the Bible and figuring out what to do from a moral standpoint. The word, I want to throw in another word because we just kept talking about the word inerrancy. There's another word, infallible, that sounds a little bit more like what you were saying, Jason. So infallible would mean, if I hold the Bible as infallible, I would say it's incapable of error. So I'd still say that, but that it's not, and it's not liable to mislead, deceive, or disappoint, but that it's incapable of error in defining doctrines touching faith and morals. Some authors use inerrancy and infallibility interchangeably, but for others, inerrancy refers to a more complete view of that. So infallible would still put the Bible very high, but not quite into the scientific realm and things that we were talking about there.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know.
Go ahead.
I still bristle against that a little bit because I'm like, it still feels like, because here's the thing. The Bible has been used to harm folks for so long, and whether we can do all kinds of arguing about it, but there are times where I'm like, well, I can see where you got there. Like, it's not that far out that it's like, oh, that's so batshit crazy, you'd never find it in the Bible. Well, no, actually, there's some batshit crazy in the Bible. So it's like, so then I'm like, no, I do think it can, like, it's in fact, it fails because we're humans. Like, we're still humans doing the thing. So like, it's interesting, like, I don't know. Yeah. It does crazy. There's crazy stuff in there. There is stuff that
there is. Yes. Yeah. Well, again, this is where, like, context, I think, is so important because, like, I mean, this is like the cliche response to something like this, but like the Old Testament, the law is an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And then Jesus comes along and says, well, you've heard it said an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I say, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Right. And like, go the extra mile, turn the cheek, give away your, like, Jesus kind of rewrites the Old Testament. And yet the Old Testament was an advance on the violence that was happening, right? Like, if someone punched you, you killed them, right? And that was like understood as like appropriate. And so like the Old Testament itself is trying to like back down on the cycle of violence. Obviously it's still keeping the cycle going, but it's actually a mitigating factor as opposed to just an expression.
But even there, I would say that's actually getting at the how you read it part. Because if I were doing a study on that verse, I would want to make sure that we're looking at the context of people coming out of slavery and how nonviolent it is to say that whether you're a slave owner or a slave, whatever your role is in society, it's eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. And I would say there's a way to read that verse is actually quite liberating from an enslaved people to say nobody punishes anybody any extra than anybody else. We are on equal ground with the justice system. There's a way to read that not as violent, but as a revolutionary equalizer for its time, especially for its time. So I would still, even those things, there's a how we read it question.
Well, right, and then we actually create, like, you hear this phrase in military, like a proportional response, right? So some country does something to our country, and we have to have a proportional response. Where do we get that idea? An eye for an eye, right? Like that's literally what it is. It's like, if they do this to us, what's the proportional response to do to them in order to get them back, right? And so like we have these ideas embedded in us. And yes, if we go back, it's actually much more liberating and beautiful than we actually think it is. And yet we've interpreted it and brought it forward and we use it as military policy. So yeah, I mean, it's complicated.
Maybe that brings up the question of part of this question of infallible or inerrant or another thing. I would probably in my own life just call the Bible sacred and leave it a term like that doesn't have all of the doctrinal baggage. But even there, one of the questions we're still asking is, what does it and what doesn't it apply to in the modern world? Like, is it a book? Is it sacred for me? Is it sacred for us? Is it sacred for all of us? Is it sacred for government? Like, that becomes another question in the whole thing.
Dear Lord.
We're going to talk about that?
We don't have time to unpack that.
I just feels related.
That one for later.
It feels related and embedded into this. It
100%.
It's 100% related. It is 100% related. I mean, I'm not.
The way you said it was
we are not going to go into this. We are not going to go into this, but
we're going to take it an episode at a time.
But here's how real this is. Like, I ran for city council, and I'm on city council in New Brighton, and people have asked, like, "Oh, are you gonna do anything else in politics later on?" And like, I have no idea. Probably not, but who knows, right? Like, I don't know what the future is going to hold. I don't know what role what I'll feel called to do. But like, there's a part of me that's like, well, I definitely couldn't be at this level because I don't want to order troops to go harm people. Like that, like to Lisa's point about taking human life, I don't want to be the one responsible for having to call the shots to say, yes, there is an equation there's an algorithm that we use to decide how many human lives are allowed to lose, in order to stop the bad guys. Or here's the number of bad guys we're willing to take out in order to stop this. Like that's I'll cross that bridge if I need to, like, as far as like, how do I hold that? But yeah, that's a real question about what do we expect of our leaders? What do we expect of people how does someone be a Christian and do some of these things that the world in essence demands? Yeah. Jesus wasn't writing to the Romans or talking to the Romans, which I always find fascinating. He never says like, hey, you know what you should do? Put your swords down. He tells Peter that, but he doesn't say that to any of the Roman centurions walking around Jerusalem.
Well, that's perhaps a offshoot of our conversation today as well, because we're kind of at our timeline. And I'm just thinking about how this season is going to keep unfolding, because I feel like we just barely touched a bunch of topics here. But I wonder about trying to give some practice, like just some level of something to our listeners of like, what do you do with this question? And so I'm wondering about like, would we say, hey, just spend a few minutes journaling about what you believe? Is it,
can we maybe link that quote into the show notes
about inerrancy?
Yes. And then maybe the prompt for people is to say, hey, take that quote and journal about it. Like maybe you're like me, where it's like, hey, I think the first part of this really resonates, but the rest of it feels really off, or all of it really resonates and here's why it still does, or none of it resonates and this is why. Like, I think that quote is a good launching point for like people to just kind of like mull over how do they hold that idea. And then I think the second prompt would be like, if we're not going to just use terms like inerrant or infallible, but maybe we want to use the word sacred, like, okay, what does that mean to you? Like, what does the word sacred mean? And like, what role does that play in your life?
Or you can talk to a friend if you don't want to journal.
100%.
Or whatever, it's that thing like, or come up with all the questions you have. I find that sometimes these things, like sometimes these big, huge, like topics feel risky. So I start to try to ask like, what questions do I have? What is it? What happens if I don't think that? What if I do? Like, because I think the ramifications that we have in some of these things is that we're messing with the idea of being in or out of a community of folks. And that feels dangerous. You can feel really unsettled in your body and all those things. And so sometimes you can just ask the questions and let them sit. But it's better to, like, in this case, what we're hoping for is that you actually can figure out what it is you do think about it, or maybe a question or two that you have. And then if you have questions, we'd love to like send those suckers in, because
right, we can
as many voices. Like, maybe the other question that Jesus should be asking is like, and who are you reading it with? Because that makes a big difference. Like, if your pastor is probably preaching towards something, not just not just reading the Bible and being done. There's like a whole sermon. So I think
I like that. So the 4 questions that we are identifying, because I'm adding this one into Steph's, is what is written? How do you translate it? Or how do you do all the contextual hermeneutical, getting to this point of this way of reading? Who are you reading it with? And then kind of like, what do you think? That's good.
Well, let's keep moving through those kinds of questions as we go through this season. And just a reminder, we are never a place with answers. We believe questions are better than answers. So you'll be sorely disappointed if you come back expecting an answer to any of these questions.
We have thoughts.
We have thoughts. We will just keep asking the questions and searching the sacred.
This has been a 40 Orchards podcast. At 40 Orchards, our mission is to create circles for all people to wrestle through biblical texts so that together we can expand each other's experience of what is sacred, whole, and good. We search through the lens of sacred possibility, assuming there is more to be discovered, questioned, and applied as we listen for how God is still speaking. You can learn more about 40 Orchards and sign up for a study by going to 40orchards.org. Our opening music is by Less FM. Our closing music is by NCR Music Vibes. Additional music is by 3 Music. Any references to books or other sources can be found in the show notes of this episode. Thank you for searching the sacred.